Yeah, today? It's been like all season. I feel a couple things.
Defense, like you were talking about.
Yeah, they had that and 9 free throws. So,
Just a week ago, the Indiana Fever looked like the most dangerous team in the league. This wasn't the same shaky squad from earlier in the season. They weren't just squeaking by anymore. They were bulldozing opponents. A convincing win over the Dallas Wings. A dominant performance against the Minnesota Lynx. And then the statement of all statements, a crushing victory over the Las Vegas Aces. 3 games, 3 wins, and not just any wins. These were defining, playoff caliber performances. The craziest part? They did all of it without Caitlin Clark. Clark had been sidelined with a groin injury, but the Fever didn't flinch. Kelsey Mitchell stepped into a new gear, running the offense with the confidence of a seasoned vet. Aaliyah Boston was in full beast mode, gobbling up rebounds, anchoring the paint, and scoring at will. Natasha Howard brought veteran stability and kept the young squad focused. Even the bench players, often overlooked, played with purpose, energy, and chemistry. They looked locked in, dangerous, unified. So when the Fever walked into their matchup with the struggling Los Angeles Sparks, everyone thought they knew how the story would go. The Sparks were a bottom-tier team with nothing to play for but pride. Indiana was riding a high. ESPN's matchup predictor gave them nearly a 73% chance to win. Vegas odds makers favored them by 6.5 points. This wasn't supposed to be a game. It was supposed to be a coronation, a 4th straight win, another notch in the belt. What followed wasn't just an upset, it was an eruption. And not from the scoreboard, from the officiating. Hours before the game, the Indiana Fever made the call. Caitlin Clark would sit out for her 5th straight game. The injury was still lingering, a nagging groin issue that needed time, care, and patience. Stephanie White emphasized the long game. Clark's future mattered more than short-term wins. The team didn't want to rush her back too soon, especially when the playoffs were still in sight. The decision made sense, but it hurt. Clark isn't just a scorer, she's the fuel that drives the entire engine. With her on the court, the Fever's offense stretches out. Defenders are forced to guard 30 feet from the rim. Passing lanes open. Boston gets cleaner looks. Mitchell gets space. Everything flows. Without Clark, that flow slows down. The spacing tightens. The ball sticks more. Boston sees more doubles. The backcourt has to create in traffic. It becomes harder to execute, harder to get easy points, and harder to stay confident when shots don't fall. The team had adjusted well in her absence, but that rope was starting to fray. And against even a mediocre opponent, missing your floor general can spell disaster, especially when the referees decide to play a bigger role than the actual players. If losing Clark wasn't enough, Indiana walked into this game down even more firepower. Derisha Dantas was overseas representing her country in the FIBA Americas. That was a blow to the rotation, a reliable, experienced player who brings both size and smarts off the bench. And then came the bombshell. Dana Bonner had quit the team entirely. Suddenly, the Fever were down 3 key rotation players. That doesn't just change the starting 5, it guts the depth. Bench players who were used to spot minutes were now logging major time. Players were forced out of their comfort zones. Lineups were shuffled. Matchups became harder to manage. And more importantly, fatigue became a real factor. In basketball, rotations matter. Roles matter. Timing matters. Chemistry builds over time. And when you lose 3 major pieces, you're scrambling. But even with all that stacked against them, the Fever were still favored. That's how much belief people had in Indiana's core. That's how much respect Boston, Mitchell, and Howard had earned. And that's what made what happened next so infuriating. Let's make this clear. This game was supposed to be a win. Every stat, every trend, every gut instinct pointed to an Indiana victory. The Sparks had just 5 wins all season. They had no rhythm, no momentum, and no matchup advantage. They were bottom tier in nearly every major category: scoring, rebounding, efficiency, you name it. Meanwhile, the Fever were hot. They had momentum, confidence, identity. Mitchell was finding her voice. Boston was quietly making her MVP case. The locker room was gelling. On paper, Indiana didn't just have more talent, they had more purpose. The game wasn't supposed to be close. It wasn't supposed to come down to calls. The logic was simple. Even without Clark, Indiana had more than enough to win comfortably. But paper doesn't call fouls. And what unfolded on the court? That was a masterclass in how bad officiating can ruin the game. From the opening quarter, something felt off. The energy wasn't there. The Fever weren't attacking with the same edge. The ball movement looked sluggish. Boston went long stretches without touches in the paint. The spacing collapsed. Possessions got longer, uglier, more desperate. It was clear the offense missed Clark. But even more than that, the rhythm wasn't allowed to develop, because just as Indiana started to build some momentum, whistle, offensive foul, touch foul, no call on the other end, another whistle. You could feel the game start to turn. Not because the Sparks were executing at a high level, but because the refs were inserting themselves into every possession. The Fever players started looking to the bench. They started hesitating. The confidence began to erode. And still, somehow they hung in there. Here's what makes this loss so hard to stomach. The Fever's core players gave everything. This wasn't a night where the team fell flat. This was a night where the stars showed up, performed, and were still left empty-handed. Aaliyah Boston played like the best center in the league. She dropped 23 points and hauled in 12 rebounds, battling through constant double teams and questionable foul calls. Every possession, she was banging in the paint, taking contact, and finishing through chaos. And even when the whistle didn't go her way, she didn't back down. She stayed aggressive. She stayed composed. Kelsey Mitchell was relentless. 19 points, 3 triples, and the kind of floor leadership that shows why she's one of the most consistent guards in the WNBA. She became the heartbeat when the offense slowed. She found ways to keep Indiana alive, attacking closeouts, reading defenses, and taking smart shots. It was also a milestone game, her 251st with the Fever, second only to the legendary Tamika Catchings. Then came Natasha Howard. She brought everything. 21 points, 9 boards, high-efficiency shooting, veteran calm. When Indiana needed a steadying hand, she was there. When the Sparks made a run, she responded. Her impact was everywhere, on defense, on the boards, in the pick and roll. She was the glue holding everything together. These three carried the weight of a team missing its superstar, its rotation, and its rhythm. They pushed through exhaustion. They rose above the noise. They played well enough to win. And still, they lost. Because it wasn't just about what Indiana did. It was about what the officials didn't let them do. Let's not sugarcoat it. This game was hijacked by the whistle. The officiating wasn't just inconsistent, it was blatantly one-sided. And it started early. Sophie Cunningham was literally grabbed by the neck in a tie-up. No foul called. Instead, the refs awarded a jump ball. On the very next possession, she was shoved to the floor. Again, no call. Just play on. Aaliyah Boston, the best player on the court, was called for multiple fouls where no contact occurred. She spent critical stretches on the bench in foul trouble, not because she made mistakes, but because the refs decided her dominance needed to be slowed down. Her mere presence in the paint became a whistle magnet. McDonald, who had been one of Indiana's most reliable defenders, was hit with consecutive fouls for simply contesting shots with vertical arms. Meanwhile, on the other side of the floor, Sparks players were bodying through defenders, swiping down on layups, and hammering through screens with zero consequence. By the fourth quarter, it was clear this wasn't going to be decided by players. It was going to be decided by stripes. And that's exactly what happened. What fans saw wasn't just bad officiating, it was a pattern, a double standard, a league-wide imbalance that's becoming impossible to ignore. When a player like a Ja Wilson or Kelsey Plum drives into the paint, the benefit of the doubt is automatic. The whistle comes. The free throws follow. When Boston or Clark does the same, silence. Or worse, offensive foul. When Caitlin Clark gets fouled on a jumper, there's no call. When she gets hit going to the rim, she's told to play through it. But when a bigger market player gets breathed on, that's a trip to the line. It's more than inconsistency. It's favoritism. And it sends a message. Some players are protected, others are punished. Some teams get the calls they need. Others have to beat their opponent and the refs. That's not just frustrating, it's dangerous. It turns fans off. It turns players bitter. And it turns a league full of promise into a spectacle for the wrong reasons. After the final buzzer, after the blown calls, the missed opportunities, and the pure exhaustion, Stephanie White stepped to the podium. And she didn't launch into a tirade. She didn't throw chairs or curse out the officials. She said 5 words. We didn't get the calls. That was it. But those words hit like a hammer. Because they weren't just about one game. They were about every game this season where Clark has been fouled without a whistle. Where Boston has battled while getting punished for being too physical. where Mitchell has had to claw for points while her defender was handed free throws. White's 5 words weren't an excuse. They were a truth bomb, and they echoed far beyond that press conference. This wasn't just a game, it was a spotlight. A spotlight on a team battling every possible adversity, injuries, roster changes, media pressure, and now officiating bias. But here's what makes the Fever so compelling: they're not folding. Boston is emerging as a top-tier centerpiece. Mitchell is transforming into a vocal leader. Howard is playing with a sense of urgency. The young players are growing. The coaching staff is sharpening the game plan. This team is evolving before our eyes. They didn't lose because they weren't good enough. They lost because they weren't allowed to finish. And now they're angry and focused and more dangerous than ever. Caitlin Clark is coming back. She's been rehabbing, watching, waiting, and she's seen it all. The missed calls, the hard fouls, the disrespect, the wins without her, the losses where her presence might have made the difference. And when she returns, this team won't be searching for identity. They'll have one. Clark, Boston, Mitchell, Howard, Hall, a bench that's battle-tested, a coaching staff that's fired up, a fan base that's boiling over. The league better prepare itself, because Indiana doesn't forget. And when this team is whole again, they're not just coming for wins, they're coming for payback. If you're tired of watching refs decide games, drop a Fever rise in the comments. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, because when Caitlin Clark returns, the revenge tour begins.